Donald Trump thought he could hit Canada where it hurts. 25% tariffs on steel, 25% on aluminum, extra levies on lumber, cars, and pretty much anything that moves across the border. The message was simple. You want access to our market, you'll pay for it. But Mark Carney looked at that same trade war and saw something else. An opportunity to do what Canadian leaders almost never do. Hit back, pick favorites, and quietly use Trump's tariffs as cover for something every government dreams of. A massive, made-in-Canada industrial policy. Tonight on Huge Press Room, we're going inside Carney's revenge plan. How he's using cash, credits, and contracts to protect lumber and steel from Trump's tariffs. Why he says this isn't corporate welfare but strategic survival, and how this could either save Canada's industrial base or blow up into a very expensive mistake. You're watching Huge Press Room. If you want more deep dives into Trump versus Canada, trade wars, and the power games behind the headlines, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let's get into it. Let's start with the two sectors that have been punched over and over in every US-Canada trade fight. Lumber and steel. On steel and aluminum, this story goes back to Trump's first term. He used national security to slap tariffs on metal imports from allies, including Canada, under Section 232 of US law. That fight ended with deals and partial rollbacks, but the damage stuck. Canada learned that steel can be turned into a political weapon at any time. Fast forward to his second term and the IEEPA fentanyl tariffs. Most Canadian goods face a 25% surcharge at the border. Some non-USMCA products get hit harder, up to 35%. Steel and aluminum are once again in the crosshairs, this time under a drug emergency instead of a security threat. Lumber has its own recurring nightmare. The softwood lumber dispute is like a broken record. US producers accuse Canadian lumber of being unfairly subsidized. Washington slaps duties on Canadian wood. Canada fights at NAFTA, then at USMCA and the WTO, sometimes wins, but the tariffs stay for years anyway. Add Trump's new across-the-board tariffs on top of that, and you get a perfect storm. Mills in BC and Quebec closing or cutting shifts. Steel plants in Ontario and Alberta wondering if they'll survive another hit. Thousands of workers asking why their livelihood depends on who's angry in the Oval Office this week. That's the backdrop for Carney's revenge. Unlike some past Canadian leaders who tried to ride out the storm and hope Washington calmed down, Carney is doing something different. He's owning the idea that the government should pick winners. Publicly, repeatedly, and he's picked them. We are not going to let Trump's tariffs kill Canadian steel, Canadian aluminum, or Canadian forestry. Period. So what does that look like in practice? 3 big tools. Direct support and tax credits for affected industries, buy Canadian rules in federal infrastructure and defense projects. A new wave of green industrial policy that just happens to benefit the same sectors Trump is hitting. Let's break each one down. Tool number 1. Direct money, but with a climate twist. Instead of old-school bailouts with no strings attached, Carney is framing his help for steel and lumber as a climate plus jobs package. For steel and aluminum, that means credits and grants for companies that invest in lower emission production. Electric arc furnaces, hydrogen, carbon capture, access to cheaper financing through crown corporations if they commit to staying in Canada and keeping a certain number of jobs onshore. Temporary wage and training supports in regions hammered by tariffs, so plants can retool instead of closing. For forestry and lumber, it looks like funding to modernize mills and move up the value chain. Engineered wood, mass timber for construction, higher value products instead of just raw 2x4s. Incentives for climate-smart forestry, replanting, better management, and certification that makes Canadian lumber more attractive in global markets. Emergency assistance in communities where sawmills are shutting down because U.S. duties. Puh. Trump's surtaxes make exports uncompetitive. Carney's line is simple. Trump wants to use tariffs to wipe out our industries. We're going to use his tariffs as an excuse to make them stronger and cleaner. To his critics, it's still subsidies by another name. To workers whose paychecks depend on those mills and plants, it's survival. Tool number 2, buy Canadian in big projects. The second part of Carney's revenge is hidden in something that sounds boring: procurement. The federal government is about to spend hundreds of billions of dollars over the next decade on energy projects. Transmission lines, ports, rail, and roads. Defense equipment, housing, and infrastructure for a growing population. In the old polite Canada-US relationship, a lot of that business quietly ended up with American suppliers or with Canadian companies using US steel and materials without thinking too hard about it. Carney is quietly changing the rules. New guidance and policies say Canadian-made steel and aluminum should be the default choice for big federal projects, especially when national security or resilience is part of the justification. Major construction and retrofits must look first to domestic lumber and mass timber products before importing cheaper alternatives. Where trade agreements allow, contracts can be tilted towards bidders that source a high share of inputs from Canadian producers. On paper, this is about jobs, resilience, and climate. In reality, it's also about sending a message. If Trump is going to tax our goods at the border, we're going to make sure our own taxpayer money supports our own mills and plants first. Will this trigger new complaints from US companies? Almost certainly. Will Washington call some of it disguised protectionism? Probably. But after years of watching the US weaponize Buy American rules for its own infrastructure bills, Carney's government is basically saying, two can play that game. Tool number 3, industrial policy dressed as a climate plan. The third piece of Carney's revenge plan is the most long-term and the hardest to kill, even if a future government wants to. He's baking support for steel and lumber straight into Canada's climate and housing strategy. For steel and aluminum, Canada wants to be a global player in low-carbon metals. The stuff you need for EVs, wind turbines, solar frames, and data centers. That means incentives for clean steel, similar to what the US did with its Inflation Reduction Act. It also means tying access to certain tax credits or contracts to using Canadian-made low-emission inputs for lumber and forestry. Carney is pushing mass timber as a key piece of Canada's answer to the housing crisis. Faster, lower-carbon building made from Canadian wood that creates a guaranteed domestic market for higher-value wood products, less dependent on the US home-building cycle and softwood tariffs. It gives governments a reason to funnel research money and public contracts into companies that innovate in wood-based construction. All of this gets sold to the public as good for the climate, good for housing, good for jobs in struggling regions, and it is all those things. But it's also this: a way of saying to Trump, you can tax our exports all you want. We're going to build a domestic ecosystem that keeps our mills running, our plants modern, and our workers employed, with or without your market. That's the revenge. Now there are risks, big ones. Every dollar the government spends propping up steel and lumber is a dollar not spent somewhere else. Economists warn that some of these companies might not be competitive even with tariffs gone. Subsidies can keep zombie mills alive instead of letting capital move to better uses. Other sectors, tech, services, clean manufacturing, might resent how much political love old industries get. Climate activists are split. Some say using tariffs as an excuse to lock in more heavy industry, even cleaner heavy industry, is the wrong direction. Others argue that if the world is going to keep consuming steel and wood, it may as well be produced in a relatively clean, regulated country like Canada instead of somewhere with weaker standards. And then there's the retaliation risk. If Canada's support for these sectors crosses a certain line, the US can file new trade complaints, launch fresh investigations, use the 2026 USMCA review as a chance to demand changes or threaten more tariffs. So Carney's walking a tightrope. Give enough support to keep core industries alive without handing Trump and future US administrations an easy excuse to escalate. The bigger question is this: is Carney's revenge plan smart insurance or slow-motion protectionism? On one hand, it's hard to argue with the logic. Trump weaponized tariffs. Canada had no choice but to respond. If you let your steel, aluminum, and forestry sectors collapse, you lose strategic capacity you can't easily rebuild. On the other hand, once you start heavily subsidizing certain industries, it's very hard to stop. Companies get used to the support. Politicians get used to the talking points. And the line between temporary tariff relief and permanent corporate welfare gets very blurry. In a way, Trump's trade war is giving Canada something it never really had: a political excuse to do big, bold industrial policy in the open. The question is whether that policy will actually make Canadian steel and lumber globally competitive and cleaner, or just keep a bunch of politically sensitive plants on life support. So I'll leave you with this. When you hear Trump talk about how his tariffs are making America stronger, and you hear Carney promise that no Canadian worker will be sacrificed to this trade war, ask yourself, is this the start of a smarter, more resilient Canadian economy that uses Trump's aggression to modernize and protect its backbone industries? Or is it the beginning of a new era where everyone, the US, Canada, Europe, China, spends billions subsidizing everything while workers and taxpayers pick up the tab? Is Carney's plan really revenge that makes Trump pay, or just a very expensive shield that Canada will have to hold up long after Trump is gone? Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you want the full picture of this trade war, check out our other videos here on Huge Press Room. Carney's Pipeline Revolt: How Canada is Trying to Escape Trump's Tariff Trap. The Reagan ad that made Trump terminate all trade talks, Taco Trump. Why Trump always chickens out still wrecks the border economy. And 25% tariffs. Is Trump forcing Canada to choose Asia over America? Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of Trump versus Canada. Thanks for watching Huge Press Room. I'll see you in the next one.